Welcome back at the Syria hearing of the People's Tribunal on the murder of journalists. I now call the next witness, Mr. Marwan Al Esh.
Mr. Al Esh, welcome and thank you very much for joining us. I was just hoping if you could introduce yourself for the panel and describe a little bit what you do, how you work, and what was initially your relationship with Nabil, and I'll ask you some follow-up questions.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here in the presence of this court, which is looking into a very important humanitarian matter and shedding light on some points and issues that the public has to know. First of all, I will introduce myself. I am Marwan Al Esh. I'm 66 years old, Syrian, and an engineer. I worked in the public sector at the beginning, and then I moved to the private sector in the commerce. My political affiliations are that I'm a liberal person, I'm independent, I believe in democracy for Syria. However, I paid the price for my beliefs, because in Syria, we are not allowed to think about democracy. Esteemed judges, I would like to tell you briefly a small political introduction about the situation in Syria. Yesterday, journalist Hala talked in details about it. However, she said that the movement in Syria, or the history of the movement in Syria, started in March 2011. However, this is not complete. At the beginning, Syria got its independence in 1946. From 1946 until 1958, 12 years, there was a Syrian bourgeoisie. There were magazines, newspapers, and others. There was independent media. However, with the nationalistic current in Syria, and in 1963, this vision changed, the structure of the society changed, and everything changed because of the emergency law that was declared on 8 March 1963. And then the Ba'ath coup started, was launched, and it's similar to other revolutions, other coups that, and it led to dictatorship. It did not lead to building a progressive or democratic society. That is despite of the slogan of this party, unity, freedom, and we're living together. However, they built a totalitarian regime starting 1963. The military were in charge of Syria, were in control of Syria. They marginalized the people, they marginalized the political elite, they marginalized all syndicates and all journalists. So on 8 March 1963, the repression started in Syria. And then we will move from 1963 until 1970. So we had 7 years that led to the coup of Hafez al-Assad. So he did a coup against the regime and the society, and he established a dictatorship, a terror dictatorship based on intelligence services, oppression, repression, and not giving citizens any rights. In this nation, you do not have any rights. You have to work and to produce enough for you and to serve the plan of the state. It's based on the Stalin, Ceausescu, and Mao. He followed the example of these. These are his spiritual fathers. So he built the kingdom of silence, the kingdom of terror, and the kingdom of the republic of failure. Ceausescu, he followed the steps of Ceausescu and built Syria. He built Syria also based on a security example, and based also on the Chinese Maui in the extremism that he had in his way. So all these qualities made people respect him on the surface. However, Syrians, deep inside, they don't respect this because it did not give them any possibility to growth, of natural growth. What happened in Syria was a very slow growth. However, if, for example, if he built a school or built a street, they celebrate it as a great achievement. However, they decided to forget the long history of Syria, over thousands of years, with a great culture and heritage. Everything was put on hold on 8 March 1963, and this was deepened by Hafez al-Assad. Starting in 1970, parties were banned, newspapers were banned, expressing our opinions was banned, and there was all the Syrians were repressed. Syria has 16 confessions, ethnicities, and religious groups. Syria is diversity. Syria lived 1,400 years without any conflicts. There was not even a civil war. There was no fight between Syrians. Never. This has never happened in the entire history. Maybe there were some small incidents under the Ottomans. However, Syria after 1963 and 1970 is a new Syria compared to our history. Since 1970 and in 1975, secret parties were established. Syrian opposition is not similar to opposition in Europe. Syrian opposition does not have any rights. European opposition participates in the parliament and in public life. Syrian opposition is oppressed and they are not allowed to express their opinion. If we distribute the magazine or a secret, if we distribute any magazines or newspapers related to these secret parties, we would be sentenced to 10 years in prisons. One of my colleagues, who is a communist, was imprisoned for 10 years because he was distributing a party newspaper. So all this created some sort of revolution inside the people. So this oppression and this violence and this military dictatorship was reflected in and stayed inside the Syrians, who were not able to do anything. In 1963, when the Ba'ath took control, the first resistance started in 1964. Some civilians rose against the measures of the Ba'ath and against the policies of nationalizing the society. However, so in 1964, a small movement was established that was fighting a dictatorship. However, this faded, and then we reached the 80s. In the 80s, and unfortunately, the society was fed up with this oligarchy, with this group that is controlling Syrian people and giving them the crumbs of their resources at a time when the elites are living in their palaces and they're living outside of Syria or taking their money out of Syria. In the 80s, the Syrian people was repressed because of the movement of one religious group, which is the Muslim Brothers, composed of 3,000 to 4,000 members. They started as a civilian movement, and then it turned into a military movement. So Hafez al-Assad mobilized the entire country to fight and to fight them. So these 4,000. So Hafez al-Assad did not only arrest these 4,000 people, but he arrested the entire society through his security apparatus, the military, the army, the special forces. And all these were just executing his desires. So he confiscating the society, the entire society, and came up with the slogans, Hafez forever. So he became like a god who is worshipped by his security apparatus. And the word Hafiz was being memorized by children when they are when they are very young. So when a child is 6 years old, he should go to a children organization belonging to Al-Ba'ath. And then they have to move to the young, the cubs. And then they have to move to the Ba'ath party and then to the military. So they are brainwashed. So Hafiz erased the entire history of Syria, all the culture from very historical poets and scientists. He erased everything and kept everything for himself. He wanted to be the god, the dictatorship who is a god. In such a society, this is not normal. The Syrians had to rise. Hafiz al-Assad died in 2000. Unfortunately, the political elites related to this family and related to him decided to give the power to his son. So it became like a monarchy and not a republic. In a republic, the power is not inherited, but this happened in Syria. So the Syrians became a bit optimistic that the repression period of Hafiz al-Assad throughout 30 years, these very long 30 years, they thought that this period is over with when a young person called Bashar came, and he was an ophthalmologist who studied in the UK and for 2 years. So he was supposed to be an educated person who have lived in the West and learned the values of the West. So probably he was influenced by these values. However, we reaped the negative impact of the UK on him. He was hosted in the UK, and he witnessed the democratic values and the respect of citizens over there. However, when he came to Syria, he came with an iron fist. When his father died, and some princes from the Gulf, he told them, "Don't think that this is my hand." When he extended his hand to them, he said, "Don't think that this is my hand. This is an iron hand or an iron fist." So the Syrians were optimistic, and I was one of them, that a window to go out of Hafiz's dictatorship is open. So from we, the Syrian people, the journalists, the syndicates, and everyone, we were all unofficial and only based on our personal status. We were not allowed to meet or to be an organization. So we have to work within the field that the regime has given us. We cannot work outside of it. So we thought that a window was open. We have a new young president, and we were optimistic. We thought that he is different from his father. So we thought that we have to cooperate with him in order to move Syria towards a more advanced phase, to build a democracy, and not to continue with the totalitarian regime with the violence and depriving people from their rights. So, and then a movement called the Spring of Damascus was established, and so they said that this is a new president and he will allow us to work. So they established the Riyadh Safe Forum, the Badra Khan Forum in Hasake, and other fora in Hasake and Aleppo and other areas of the country. So these people felt comfortable, and I was one of them. I thought that there was no arrest, there was no violence. Suddenly, so we're talking about the July 2000, 3 months after that, we were informed that we were not allowed to gather because these fora were illegal. And then they started with an arrest campaign against everyone who participated in the fora. They arrested Habib Isa, their colleagues, Fawaz Killo, and others. So they arrested 10 people, and they considered them as the leaders of the media. They considered them as the leaders of the Spring of Damascus. So they sentenced them to 5 years, except for Adel Dalile, who was sentenced for 10 years, and there were reasons for this. So they repressed the dialogue based on culture and building the new Syrian identity or nationalist identity. However, this spirit of democratic change remained. And In 2005, I joined the Damascus Declaration project for Syrian nationalists from secular people, from independent people, and from the eliminated people. So we did this Damascus Declaration. So the Syrian democratic change. Our slogan in this declaration was Syrian democratic change that is safe, calm, and progressive, and not a coup. So we wanted to cooperate with all Syrian forces, all Syrian factions, all Syrian parties, and all the ethnic components of the Syrian society in order to establish a new political body for the state. We also convened a meeting in Damascus on the 30th of December 2007, and a few days later, so the meeting extended over a few days, and then the response was these people, these 12 people, 4 doctors, 3 journalists, 2 engineers, and an artist, and 2 female doctors, Ms. Horani, who is the daughter of another politician, and the other person who is Yasser Aiti. You can see their photos on the screen. We have also Fayez Sara, we have Mahaji Darwish, and under the lady Ms. Fida, there is Akram al-Binni, then Dr. al-Binni, Mr. Shufi, and then Ali Abdullah, who is a journalist, and then we have Ahmad Tami, then we have Marwan Al Esh, then Mr. Saif, who is very well known, and then we have the artist Talal. So all these 12 people were the leaders of the Damascus Declaration. They were calling for nationalistic spirit, for democracy, to build a modern state and not to continue under the slogan. So we wanted a safe, progressive, calm, democratic change. What do you want better than such a slogan? So what does the people want other than this? However, we met, and a national council was elected, and 189 Syrian figures attended this meeting from all ethnicities, and they issued this declaration, which is the Damascus Declaration. The regime did not like this. How would we call for a change? And this change is an attack, is trying to remove the regime. But what we meant is trying to build a state of citizens, a nationalistic state that embraces diversity. This is what we want as a democratic state. But however, what happened? These 12 people, all these 12 people were arrested. We were put in the intelligence headquarters for 2 months with torture. The third person is Mr. Faiz Sara. He was beaten in front of us. His screaming and his moans reached the entire building, filled the entire building. Ali Abdullah also, and others. So they used violence against us. They used atrocious ways to torture us. We had 2 months of psychological and physical torture, and they wanted us to retract this declaration. However, we held on tight, and then we were sent to a court. Usually, we would be sent to a extraordinary court or the military field court. However, since we had a lot of relations and connections with European people, the French president and the Speaker of the Irish Parliament and some members of the European Parliament, they all interfered, and through them we were able to move from military court to a civilian court, and we were tried before a civilian court, Syrian civilian court. We had a defense, and with the presence of figures, prominent figures. So lots of people volunteered to defend us, among them Khalil Ma'atouk, Mr. Mazen, and he is forcefully disappeared, among others. So there were 17 democratic Syrian lawyers who defended us. So at the beginning, they sentenced us to 15 years of prison inside Naya. However, the interference of the Europeans and Syria was trying to sign some agreements with some European countries. So they gave us only 30 months as a jail sentence, and we were moved to Adra prison, which is a civilian prison, in 2008. So we spent 2008, 2009, and 2010 in the prison. I was released in July 2010. My colleagues were released either before me or after me, depending on the date of the detention. And during the imprisonment, so it was a civilian prison and not a military prison, so it was not like Saidnaya prison. In Saidnaya, you would stay in one room for 10 years. So one room for 10 years, one cell. It's 40 centimeters by 40 centimeters. This is the quota of a Syrian citizen in military prisons such as the Palmyra prison and the Saidnaya prisons, others. So 40 by 40 centimeters. You get one piece of potato or 2 olives or 1 piece of bread only per day. And during some time, some of our colleagues in Palmyra prison, they spent 3 months without bread. They were denied bread. This is what the head of the prison wanted. And the heads of the prisons were like gods. The head of the Saidnaya prison was also like a god. So they did not discriminate whether you're a journalist, doctor, a normal citizen. Everyone was oppressed, everyone was repressed, and everyone was dealt with in the same way, humiliated and with violence. So I was released from prison in July 2010, and that was 9 months before the revolution. During the imprisonment, we were debating a lot. So since it's a civilian prison, we would meet with our colleagues and we receive visits. So the late Mashhad Kilo, may his soul rest in peace, and others were detained before us, like Anwar al-Binni, Habib Isa, and others. So they had all signed the Damascus Declaration. So we used to meet some of them in prison, and we used to debate how we can change this country. So we were debating where is Syria headed, and we were wondering why this violence, why this psychological terrorism, and why doesn't Syria take the steps of advancement and development? We want a democracy like Mauritania and like Malaysia. We want a democracy just like any other democracies in our countries, such as Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia. And unfortunately, Arab countries cannot be taken as examples for democracy. There were some democracies, such as in Mauritania, but we were wondering, when will these people rise? That was when we were in prison. So these men, these 12 men, were all trying to look for solutions for Syria. They were trying to look for solutions for the Syrian people and the Syrian nation, not military coup and not terrorist solutions. Not, but they were trying to find solutions with logic and with a humanitarian point of view. However, the regime did not respond to us. It's closed. It's the kingdom of silence. The regime is like a god. You have this road. You have to walk this road. If you go out of this road, you are killed. Whether they're Islamists, Christians, or other religions, whether you are a socialist or a communist, everyone was being arrested. No one was protected. No one was above this. Everyone was subject to detention.
You were released in July 2010. And what had changed in Syria then from the time you were in prison and that precipitated the uprising in 2011?
So, as I said, we were in prison, and we were meeting and talking with our colleagues through windows, through water pipes from a room to another. We were talking through water pipes from a toilet to a toilet. This is how we were communicating. We were communicating through a small hall, like a window, and sometimes I used to meet some people through visits. I met with Mazen in a visit through a net. Nothing changed during our presence in prison. The regime did not change. There was no advancement. There was no steps towards any political transformation. There was no social change. So all this exploded on the 15th of March. That was the starting point. The Syrians exploded when they heard about the Arab Spring in Tunisia, when Ben Ali fled, and in Egypt when Hosni Mubarak left and gave the power to a military council, and other places also. Then the killing of Gaddafi. So all these changes happened, and we were just looking and we were watching. And then came the chant, "Where are you, my Syrian citizens?" This was the moment of the explosion of the Syrian people that ignited. This was what ignited the Syrian people on 15 March, when a Syrian woman, young Syrian woman, called Noor al-Ghamyan, is the one who ignited this. She carried the Syrian flag, as my colleague said, and stood in the middle of a square and said, "God, Syria, and freedom." So this woman and 6 other university students. So the youth started the revolution and not us, and we give them this credit. These young people like Khulud, Hanan, and others such as Hossama as well, and Nabil Churbajie, Yahya Churbajie, and others from Damascus, the Reef of Damascus, and other cities. These are the ones who get the credit. They were one step ahead of us. Us as politicians, we failed because the regime made us fail. The regime does not want any partners in the power. What we wanted was to build a democratic state that respects the human rights and respects humans. We are innovative people. We have doctors, we have engineers, we have thousands of professions. However, everything was oppressed. All people wanted to be civil servants and get their salary, and that's it. The regime oppressed innovation. If you want to innovate, you have to pay the price. If you say no, you pay the price. If you want to bring new ideas, you are not allowed to do this. Madam Prosecutor, to answer your question, what changed compared to 2007 or what changed after my release from prison? A lot of things changed. In prison, we learned, and then we saw that things were boiling. So we saw that the ideology of a revolution in Syria was started to boil, and that was before the 9th of October 2010. There were repressed people in Syria. There's the Jazeera area where there was drought and there was no work. The agriculture was damaged. There was only oil that was being extracted, and the money was going to the pockets of the political elite and not to serve the people. We have oil, we have gas, we have natural resources, we have agriculture, we have wheat. We used to produce 3 million tons of wheat per year, and now we barely produce 100,000 tons of wheat.
So I wanted to paint this clear picture. The woman yesterday said that Syrians started thinking about this in 2011. No, they started thinking about this in March 1963, about how to resist the system that came with guns, with tanks, with dictatorship, just like fascism, unfortunately. These military men have an average education. They just go to military college after getting their high school degree. They don't have a high education degree, so they have limited education, and then they carry weapons, they carry missiles, tanks, and other heavy weapons. But this created like a lack of or a complex of inferiority among soldiers and military men. I am proud of being Syrian, and the military should be Syrian, citizens should be Syrians. The Syrians lived 1,400 years with coexistence. So we arrived to the morning of March 15th. Okay, now I will move to the morning of March 15th. Noor al-Ghamyan and college students went to the Umayyad Mosque. They went to the Hamidiyya Souk, which is the biggest and most famous souk in Damascus. They called for democracy, change, freedoms. However, the regime, the party, and a lot of people were still chanting God, Syria, and Bashar. Bashar, at the end of the day, is a human being. Why are you chanting for Bashar? Call for democracy, call for change, call for growth, democracy, without useless slogans. So we reached the morning of March 15th. In Damascus, people rose, and people rose in other provinces the days later. On March 16th, the day mentioned by my colleagues, actually, I was released from prison in July 2010, but my colleagues were still in prison. Ali al-Abdallah was also sentenced to 2 years and a half because he published an article against al-Khomeini and the elections in Iran. While he was in prison, he wrote an article, Mr. Ali Abdallah Abu Hussein, and he sent it to a Lebanese newspaper. He was sentenced for an additional year. He already had 2 years and a half, so then he was sentenced by a military court for an additional year in jail. Mohanad al-Hassani, also the famous Human Rights Watch lawyer, Haytham al-Malih, the famous legal experts, and many others stayed in jail. On March 15th, people couldn't take it anymore, and the revolution was ignited. The human rights organizations in Syria and the families of detainees decided to gather and to stand in front of the Ministry of Interior on 16 March 2011 at noon, calling on the minister to establish a change because they were on a hunger strike in jail. And just like my colleagues said, I was standing with Mr. Faisal and Fawaz Tillo in a location, and then Maimouna, Nabil Churbajie, Osama Nassar, and Yahya Churbajie were right next to us. Suddenly, we saw microphones, small buses, and then security guys came from these buses and started beating everyone with sticks. So because we were carrying the photos of detainees, they started with us, and then they moved to other people. So some groups were at the northern part of the square. We were in the eastern part of the square. Maimouna, Osama, Yahya, and Nabil were standing there. And then suddenly, security forces started taking them to a specific location in order to detain them. They didn't come at us because they know that we are politicians. So they started with the young people. They started detaining them. And just like Mr. Osama said, and just like my other colleagues said, this affected us immediately. Of course, Osama was detained with Mrs. Suhair Atassi. She is a relative to the previous president. She's an activist, Dr. Tizini. He's a doctor in the Damascus University, a philosophy doctor. So they detained 32 or 33 people for a little while, and then they released them.
Okay, thank you. Nabil, during the March 16th events in Damascus?
Yes, Mr. Osama introduced me to Nabil. So my brother Osama, I used to know my brother Osama before I knew Nabil. So when I was released from jail, Mr. Osama And our friend who died recently, the moderate Sheikh Jawdat Saeed, he came with Osama and some friends. They visited me in jail and they visited me in my house when I was released in order to see how I was doing. And then I was introduced by them to Nabil. They all call for freedoms, democracy, and change in Syria. On the day of the demonstration, Osama introduced me to Nabil. We talked until the security forces came to arrest them. This was my first meeting.
Were you arrested with them in 2011?
No, on that day, we were under surveillance. When a prisoner is released from jail, he is under surveillance. And then each month he would be called in order to testify, and they would surveil everything we would write on the internet. There was one officer designated for me to surveil what I was doing. This applied to all of my colleagues. But on the 1st of February 2011, so before March 2011, the security apparatus or the state security intelligence branch in Damascus called us and told us, you are politicians. However, those who are in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya rose. So are you going to do the same against our regime? We said, if the conditions, the right conditions are there, as politicians, yes, we will rise. We have demands. We want the emergency law that was established 40 years ago to be lifted. We want a modern law to allow the establishment of parties. There was no such law in Syria. The opposition parties, or what they call opposition parties, were not like regular European opposition parties. They were not really taken into consideration. So he told us, don't you dare go to the streets, because we have information that there are Israelis who will infiltrate into your protests and kill you. I am being very honest with you here, I swear.
It's very good to understand where all the resisting sectors were from the time you met these youth, Nabil and other younger professionals engaging in these activities. What was your role? How did you engage in what will happen? I mean, we can take it through 2011 and until the arrest. That was the final one of Nabil. Were you working with them? What was your relationship with this team, the Daraya group?
The Daraya group is comprised of diverse, young, peaceful people who believe, just like us as politicians, in democratic change. However, previously they were already repressed and they had detained them and put them in the Saidnaya jail, so they were a bit cautious. However, my politician colleagues and I believe in the capacities of the youth. They are the future of Syria at the end of the day. So I communicated with, I contacted Osama and the others, and I was made aware that they have a very promising program and project. Therefore, in the Damascus Declaration project, I discussed with my colleagues and we decided to open channels with them in order for us to merge maybe into one and become one group. At the end of the day, we want to build a nation that includes women, men, sheikhs, and everyone, all segments of the society. So I was the point of contact in order to talk to the Mr. Osama's group and other groups in Daraya as a peaceful democratic movement. In Syria, in the first year of revolution, no resident or protester held a gun. However, Bashar al-Assad's regime took a security path or solution. When the protests happened in March, April, May, we used to go to Daraya. My colleagues and I, we went and participated in the demonstrations in Daraya, in Duma, in Midan, in a lot of places. So every Friday, it used to be a hot spot, or it used to be important. Not because it was a Friday and it's an important day in the Muslim culture, just like Sunday for Christians, but because the regime doesn't allow any associations in universities, in cultural centers, on the streets, but people could gather in the mosque in order to pray. Our colleagues who are Christians and who are from different confessions, they met with us in the mosques. So Arabs, Turks, Kurds, Christians, Muslims, everyone and all confessions gathered in the mosque because they were allowed to gather somehow in the mosque. Was this intentional or not? This was not intentional, but as politicians, we had a relationship with the youth groups in order to support them. They were one step ahead of us. They were the innovative ones. And unfortunately, we could not really contribute politically except through international relations and statements.
And of a slightly older generation, what will you say was the impact of the arrest in 2012 of someone like Nabil?
Since we had experiences in detention in 2008, and our colleagues also had this experience before, communists were also detained just like Muslims. Syrian communists or a Syrian Communist Party, the political office also that had an important place in the communist movement, they were also detained. The regime doesn't allow you to do anything if you are with the right or with the left. So this had already affected us, and we know the experience, and we know what happens in jails. Humans are not respected. They are beaten. They are disfigurated. They get sick. I was one of the people who lost a kidney. My kidney works at 10% only due to the jail, to prison. I only had one glass of water in 24 hours, imagine, in the Special Forces intelligence sector. Then I will talk to you about what happened in 2012. So we started having chronic diseases after that. So when we saw these young men and women doing this, we were scared for them, and we told them, be careful. Despite this, they resisted. They also innovated. The women of Daraya also participated. If one man is detained, 50 to 100 women would participate in a sit-in calling for his release. Mrs. Khulud Helmi, Mrs. Hanan also testified, and there are a lot of stories. This is a revolution of a people, of an entire society, not only a revolution of men. Go ahead.
Is that again after your release in 2010?
Yes. Due to my participation in protests in Damascus and its surroundings, on the 22nd of April and on the 21st of April 2011, I was in the Daraya protest, and that day I met Nabil Churbajie for the second time, and he was just like a bird holding his camera and taking pictures. It was a great Friday. This was is originally a Syrian Good Friday day for Muslims as well. This is when Jesus Christ died. So Syrians all celebrate Good Friday. It was an occasion for all Syrians to meet. On that day, I was outside of Daraya. I came to Daraya at noon, and I saw young men filling the street. There were 4,000 to 5,000 people. They wrote on a banner, "Peaceful, peaceful, peaceful. We urge the police to protect the people." They were literally telling the police, "Don't arrest us. We are peaceful. We have demands." But what are our demands? They are basic human demands. We are asking for food that is not entrenched in blood. We also wanted freedom of expression and association. On that day, 4,000 to 5,000 Daraya residents and Damascus residents took to the streets. Daraya is a very important area. It's a symbolic area, just like Hama and other area. It has a lot of young people. Daraya is known for its youth. Daraya, Latakia, and other areas are also very symbolic. So when we got to the end of the street, the security forces started coming to arrest. Mahmoud Kholani is the first martyr who died in Daraya. 50 meters or 100 meters away, another person called Ammar, I don't remember his family name, was also killed as a martyr. And then everything escalated. They were calling for peaceful, or they had peaceful demands, and they were faced with rifles. Myself and my group and a lot of Syrians don't care who is in power and who governs us. I don't have a problem if it's Bashar or any other person. I just want him to be democratic. I want him to be just. I want him to allow freedom of expression, peaceful political transition of power, allowing an opposition or political parties that participate in free elections. In 40 years, all we witnessed was fraud in elections. And in addition to the repression of the security forces, if you say one word, you would be held accountable. I wrote a lot of articles, but in 2003, in Al-Hiwar Al-Mutamaddin, I wrote a lot of political and economic articles. My writings are on the internet. Then a security branch called on me and they asked me, "Why are you writing? You're an engineer. What does this word mean? And what does this other word mean? You have nothing to do in politics. We are the politicians and you have nothing to do there. Syrians are not allowed to do any political activities or social activities." I was a member of one of the Syrian syndicates, and then I couldn't do this anymore because I asked for these basic demands. Thank you.
In what year?
نعم.
Yes. So after the revolution, the city of Homs and the Bab Amro neighborhood was attacked by the regime. There were peaceful activists that are demonstrating in Homs, and then the regime attacked them and detained some people. Therefore, people left this province. They were displaced. This happened in July, August, September 2011. Imagine we're in 2022 now. This was more than 10 years ago. This was very early on 20 August 2012, just like what happened in Daraya. The same thing happened in Baba Amro in 2011. A lot of people left Homs and came to Damascus. When I saw them, or I was standing somewhere, and then I noticed that there was a woman and an 80-year-old man, maybe, with 6 children. I asked them, "What are you doing here?" They were scared and they didn't say a word. I told them, I'm a friend, don't worry, you can say what happened. They said, I am coming from Homs. It's like Homs is a charge, an accusation by itself. Daraya was an accusation by itself, Idlib as well. So let's say there are 10 or 100 activists in Daraya, then the regime considers that all the residents of Daraya are against the regime and traitors. So I saw this family at 9 p.m. in the cold. They didn't have anywhere to stay. I called one of my colleagues. I found an empty apartment. I brought them some blankets, food, drinks, and clothes. So this is what used to happen. We would help families coming from Homs. This was only done on a humanitarian basis. I had a friend called Omar Aziz. He was killed as a martyr in prison with me. He is a doctor in political economics from a college in France. When he heard of the revolution in 2011, he left his work in Paris One University and he came to Syria. Mr. Osama is aware of this, but he wanted to establish local councils in order for people to ask for their basic needs, hygiene, water, all these basic sanitation infrastructure. So we wanted to help, or he wrote a project asking for the establishment of local councils. It happened in Douma, then in Berze, then in Artus, and then the young people of Daraya were asked to hold elections and a municipality, a head of municipality, in order to serve all of the citizens. This man, or the regime, identified this man, and him and I were helping each other on this project and on this paper. Therefore, the regime arrested him. He went to get his salary from one of the ATMs. He found a security patrol waiting for him. They detained him. They went to his house. They confiscated his computer, his money, his belongings, and then they started to search for information in his computer until they found my name in the computer. We had an account that had some money in order to help these associations to buy tea, sugar, bread, and medications for those coming from other provinces. These were donations from Syrian people, Syrian citizens. There were like 1,000 or 2,000 euros that were designated for helping those who are coming from other provinces. On the 23rd of November 2012, they detained me. They raided my house. They confiscated my computer, my laptop. It was a Friday. They also confiscated some money that I have in the house. He humiliated me and humiliated my family in front of me. He took me to the Air Force Intelligence Branch, and then I met Omar Aziz over there. He was also killed as a martyr, or he died as a martyr because of the torture he was subject to. And for the first time, contrary to all the other detentions, I was detained during the revolution twice. During a revolution, detaining a person is different. The regime was really using unprecedented violence. When we were detained as part of Damascus Declaration, we were slapped a few times and hit with a stick a few times. That's okay. But here, 4 huge men were standing on my legs, on my arms, on my chest, and they wanted to and they wanted to kill me, suffocate me. There was a guy also who was carrying a plastic bat, and he wanted to kill me. Another guy was also holding a taser, and he was trying to tase me. We spent 24 hours of constant torture. When I first went there, they put me in a solitary cell. So it was like 2 by 1 meter. We were 16 people in this cell. There were 41 cells, from 1 to 41. Number 7 and 9 were specific for women. We were hearing their screams for children and women. And then I was in cell number 34. Omar Aziz was in cell 36. And we were being tortured 24 hours a day using tasers and many different methods, using wheels, using the German chair. There were also children there, imagine. In my cell, there was a child from Deir ez-Zor. He was 13 years old. So they were torturing him just like they were torturing me.
You coincided with Mr. Nabil in Adra prison. And just if you can relate a little bit your relationship, we're talking about in 2013.
تمام. بقيت شهرين في المخابرات.
I stayed 2 months in the Special Forces intelligence branch. Then I was transferred to Adra prison, and I was charged with terrorism. The regime classified me as a terrorist. Based on Law 19 in 2012, they established a terrorism law. They abolished the emergency law, and then there was a terrorist law. So we were all considered terrorists because we dared to speak. I arrived to Adra prison on 13 February 2012. 1 month later, and because I was a previous detainee, I have experience with prisons. Even the police knows me. They know my name. They knew that I was a troublemaker or an opposition member. So in the civil prison, there is a library. Unfortunately, this library didn't included only dozens of books. In 2013, there were around 10,000 people. I have a friend who distributes bread. He has lists, so he used to distribute a lot of bread. We counted the numbers, and we concluded there were 10,000 people in prison. So I asked to go to the library. I can't just not read. Since my detention, I read 50 books, foreign and Arabic books. So I met with his colleagues in the library, Hani, Hussein, and a lot of others. We used to meet at the library, and we were writing papers to each other.
So we were trying to see how we can serve and help the others. We were in prison. I am assuring you that this happened in prison. If Mazen had 100 pounds and needs to buy something, we would give it to another prisoner who did not have anything at all. So people would come to the prison with lice, with dermatological diseases, and some diarrhea and other diseases. So we were trying to help each other. So, for example, if I had a visit and I had 100 pounds, for example, I would try to get them medication or try to get some other people some new underwear. The situation was unimaginable. So us people who had experience, we were trying to help the people, the newcomers. I was allowed to go to the library, and I still have the library card. It's still with me, and I can show it to you. So I have all the cards, the prison card and others. I managed to bring them out of prison in certain secret ways. So once, when I was going to the library, because every 24 hours, we are allowed to go out to a square outside to have a walk for 2 hours. It's like a 2-hour break. The square of the prison is there, and each wing has 1 square. So we go from 11 until 1, and at 1 we return to our cells and they lock the doors. And the library opens two days per week, and I was allowed to go to the library 2 days per week, and then I got a special permit to go 3 days per week to the library to read. So once, when I was going in the corridor was empty, and I had to walk in front of all the cells. So there were 9 wings in this prison, 9 wings in this civil prison, and each wing has dozens of cells. And then when I was going to the library, I saw Nabil in front of me. And I knew that he was detained in February 2012. And then he met me and he greeted me and asked me why I'm here. And then I asked him why he's here. He told me that he came from the Air Force Intelligence and they put us here. And he was hoping that they would not take them to Saidnaya. So I asked him, what do you want? He said, I need £500. So I gave him £500. So he told me that every time when you return inside, they bring us out to the square. So they are isolating us, so we don't meet us. So we can't meet each other. So when the intelligence is done with interrogating some people, they send them to civil prison for some time until they are moved to another prison. So they don't give them anything. So in prison, sometimes if you need to buy food, and you have to buy food, you have to buy it with your own money, and the government only provides non-sufficient meals. 1 slice of bread that is not even enough for 1 person has to be divided by 10 people. So Nabil told me that every day at 1:30 he goes to the square. So I told him that 3 days per week I go to the library at 1:30, and I asked him what he wants. He told me that he needs clothes and he needs bread and milk. So how did we do? So there was a trash can with a plastic bag in one corner in the corridor. So I told him that I will put these things in the trash can between the plastic bag and the can, so no one would see it. So I will pretend that I would be standing in front of the trash can to hide things. So the first thing he asked me was newspapers. Because prisoners were allowed to bring in newspapers, to read newspapers. And there was the London Times. We used to receive 1 copy of it, and one of the prisoners used to read it. So after this person would read it, it goes around and 200 other people would read it. So he asked me for newspapers, magazines, money, and clothes. So I used to hide them in this trash can, and he would go and retrieve them.
Much, I'm afraid I don't have any more questions, and I don't know if the panel may have some questions, but it's a wonderful, wonderful way of contextualizing all the comings and the happenings before the 2011 and the 2000. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yes, I have a question here.
Thank you for reminding us in such clear and passionate terms of Syria's recent history and of the damage caused by dictatorship. And I think that you were right to point out that the regime's repressions has affected not only journalists, but all Democrats. From your perspective, how we could define the form of government of the regime in Syria? A dictatorship of the family, or military dictatorship, or a dictatorship of the police force and of the various branches of the secret service? Obviously, these powers are strictly linked and they work together. But I would like to know who, in your opinion, has now a dominant position in the regime's power bloc? Who has more power, and who is now more hostile to the free press? And the last question, what are the international ties that strengthen the regime?
شكرا سؤال مهم جدا.
Thank you for this very important question. You are paving the way for me to just empty everything I want to say. Hafiz al-Assad built an individual dictatorship. So a military individual dictatorship. There are no election, no democratic powers, and no social movement in this dictatorship. He is a military person, and he brought a military regime. He built a family regime. It's the regime of the Assad family. Before that, Hafiz al-Assad and Rifat al-Assad used to govern us, and now Bashar al-Assad, Maher al-Assad, and the rest of the family are governing us. The rest are all servants. All the rest are servants being paid. They receive orders and they execute them. They cannot say no. No officer, no head of branch can say no. The security apparatus is just like a ring in the finger of the regime. The regime removes it when it wants and puts it back when it wants. Any officer in the army or any high-ranked official have allegiance to this person and not to Syria. The allegiance is to the presidents, previously Hafiz al-Assad and now to Bashar al-Assad. So it's God, and next to God there's Bashar, and that's it. The regime is a dictatorship, a violent dictatorship. It does not have any values. It does not have any standards, like democratic standards. Killing is something very normal, and detention is very normal. Humiliating Syrian people, normal people, civilians, and politicians is something normal. Imagine that there are no free syndicates and unions in Syria. There are syndicates that are affiliated to the party and execute the policy of the party. There are no youth movements also. Only movements based on the party. The party executes the orders of the president. Everyone who strays away is ousted.
The external powers, the external state that strengthen the regime, in your opinion, if you...
طيب خلونا
To be honest, and I would like you to know this, the regime is a local regime. However, it has international relationships, international relations that are very deep and strong. Unfortunately, a part of Europe and the European left supports the regime of Bashar al-Assad and supported Hafiz al-Assad. Madeleine Albright is the one who brought Bashar al-Assad. She blessed him taking power and gave him the keys to Syria. This is Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State who died recently. She has pictures with Bashar al-Assad. 24 hours after the death of Hafiz al-Assad, so Madeleine Albright came and gave Bashar al-Assad the keys to Syria. So Bashar al-Assad took these keys and did whatever he wanted. The international relations. So I would like to explain to Europeans the specificity of Syria. Syria is not the Assad family. There are 23 million Syrians who dream of freedom, of democracy, of the sovereignty of a state, just like any other human being. We don't want violence. We don't want killing. We don't want blood. We want a citizen state with diversity, with several parties, with journalism, free journalism, who all work to build Syria. The Europeans supported this regime, and today, 10 years later, 10 years after the ignition of the war, when the regime fought the people, where the regime used tanks to silence the people, some European countries and some European companies are still helping the regime. Despite the sanctions, there are Belgian companies who are exporting to the regime the raw material to produce sarin and toxic chemicals that they used to bomb Syrians. There are investigations about this. There are companies from other companies, such as Denmark. They are providing the regime with kerosene for planes, and these planes are bombing the Syrians. This is double standards. The policy of the European Union is clear. We are against oppression and against what happened in Syria, and they are afraid also of the change. The Europeans and the Americans are afraid that the revolution would lead to the Islamists taking power in Syria. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a reality. The Islamists or the Islamist ideology is only 5% of the Syrians. The Muslim Brothers, which is the strongest organization in the Middle East when it comes to the Islamists, has only 10,000 to 20,000 persons only. But what about the remaining 23 million people in Syria? Why does the West look at Syria and says that after the change will lead to an Islamist state? No, this is not true. The Syrians will not accept this. The Syrians are people who love life. Syrians love good food. Syrians love to go out on a stroll, on a picnic. They like to dress nicely. They like to wear perfume. I am one of these people, and these are our values. This is how we were raised, and this is how my father was raised and my grandfather was raised, and this is how I am raising my son. We love life. We don't want to fight. The West is wrong if they think that the Syrians will accept an Islamist state such as ISIS or Nusra Front or any other Islamist organization. No, these are just they have small places in Syria. They are not the base in Syria. 95% of the Syrian people believe in social justice and democracy and in life. They love life. They only want to live, produce and live, and they don't even want any help from the state. The state, the government can provide education, basic service and infrastructure. So what I want to do is work, produce, and I contribute with the state to the state by paying taxes. So the Europeans and the Americans are wrong here. And in the Middle East, there are some regional powers that want the regime to stay, and it's in their interest for the regime to stay. And now Russia has used 16 vetoes in the Security Council, so the regime would not be sanctioned. The regime used chemical weapons, used sarin and VX to kill Syrians in Ma'arat Na'man, in Khan Sheikhoun and others. There are chemical massacres. Why wasn't this tackled by the Security Council? The ICC is closed before the Syrians. The Security Council is closed for us. Russia and China use 16 vetoes to protect the government. Unfortunately, there are countries that say that they are democratic countries, such as India and others. They are supporting the regime and they are standing by its side with any international resolution. The Human Rights Council, unfortunately, Russia was in the Human Rights Council, and they were protecting the regime. So the international relations are strong for the Syrian regime. So the Middle East is in turmoil. Your relationship has to be with the Syrian people and the real representative of the people, and not the regime. This regime is fake, and it will always be fake. The people is the one that will live and survive and will be victorious at the end. The Westerners use democracy as a way, and it's used it's a pretext for bloodbath. That's it. Thank you.
Is there a question from Gil or not? May I just add I'm sorry? Just more than a question is that, well, I thank you for saying what you just said. Perhaps we should remind all of us that little before 2011, little before the Assad regime was casted in the West as a dictatorship, etc., and only until the year before or a few months before, some Western power used it to send prisoners, unofficial prisoners, as the extraordinary rendition to Syria and to other countries, but now we are talking about Syria. in order to do what was then a dirty job that the West or the Americans didn't want to do, the United States didn't want to do by themselves. So perhaps this is not a question, this is just a comment, but perhaps this is something that we should bear in mind when we talk, as you did now, of double standards. And, well, this is.
طيب شكرا.
Thank you. I just have one remark. The regime has ties, security ties with Europeans and non-Europeans. We all agree about this. When the U.S. wants to wanted to interrogate some prisoners from Guantanamo, they sent them to Syria to extract a confession from them. With waterboarding and others, there are 71 ways of torture in Syria that were used in Syria. These ways of torture were used against everyone, international prisoners and the local prisoners. There's a Syrian guy, Syrian-Canadian guy called Marwan. He was he was an engineer, and he used to live in Canada, and his wife was Canadian. So a report came from one of the countries saying that he is a terrorist, and he was extradited to Syria, where he was detained for 3 years. Canada extradited him to Syria, and then his case is known. And then a while later, Canada retrieved him, so asked the regime to give him back to her. To them, sorry. So he was returned to Canada, and they apologized to him. And eventually, this report and this accusation, it turned out that it was false, and they had to pay him a reparation. Maher Marab wrote a book about what he saw and what he witnessed in Syrian prisons. So lots of Syrian apparatus, the security apparatus in Syria, they use. The international community sometimes use the Syrian regime in order to do dirty work for them. And some people wanted the Syrian regime to stay because of this security file. And what we say, the Syrian people has to stay in order to build a secular state, a democratic state. We are not a terrorist state. The Syrian people are not terrorists. There are rare cases of Syrians who were detected with terrorist accusations. But these are very rare cases. It's rare that Syrians would cause problems. Syrian people are simple people. They don't like violence. There are other people maybe who like violence or who like terrorism. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think we have any more questions. We've heard a lot from you, but thank you very much.
شكرا.
Thank you.